Vampires, creatures of the night, the stuff of legends, and the terror of ancient civilizations. But where did these terrifying tales originate? Was there ever any truth behind them, or is the vampire just a creature of pure fiction? In today's video, we're diving deep into the dark origins of the vampire myth, exploring its historical roots and separating fact from fiction. Welcome to Ancient Echoes. The first whispers of vampire-like creatures emerge in ancient civilizations long before the sleek, blood-drinking beings we know today. In ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt, there were legends of monstrous, revenant-like figures who returned from the dead, feeding on the living. However, these early creatures weren't the suave immortals we associate with modern vampires. In fact, they were often depicted as grotesque, demonic beings, far more monstrous than romanticized. For example, the ancient Greeks spoke of the empusa, a shape-shifting demon that preyed on young men. Meanwhile, in Slavic folklore, the Nosferatu was a terrifying creature believed to drain life force rather than just blood. The word Nosferatu actually comes from the Greek nosophoros, meaning plague-bearer, showing how these early vampires were often linked to disease and death. Rather than being seductive, they were harbingers of doom, and their presence in a community was seen as an omen of disaster. The link between vampires and disease becomes even more chilling when we consider the medieval period. During times of plague, hysteria ran rampant as people struggled to explain the devastating deaths that seemed to strike without warning. Bodies were found in unusual conditions, sometimes showing signs of decomposition that seemed unnatural. In response, communities would exhume bodies of the deceased, mutilating them to prevent them from rising. Stakes were driven through their hearts, heads were severed, and garlic or holy relics were placed around their graves. These actions weren't based on superstition alone, but a desperate attempt to protect the living from what was perceived as an undead scourge. But how did these terrifying creatures of folklore evolve into the seductive, immortal beings we associate with vampires today? The answer lies in the creation of Count Dracula. Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula solidified many of the vampire traits we recognize today: immortality, an aversion to sunlight, the ability to control minds, transforming the vampire from a grotesque monster into a more polished and complex figure. Stoker drew inspiration from historical figures like Vlad the Impaler, a 15th-century Romanian prince known for his brutal, impaling methods of execution. However, Stoker's Dracula was more than just a historical figure. He was a fusion of folklore, fear, and the anxieties of Victorian society. While Dracula is the prototype for modern vampires, the mythology had already been evolving for centuries, melding the ancient fears of the undead with emerging ideas of seduction, immortality, and forbidden desire. From there, the vampire myth would continue to evolve, cementing its place in modern pop culture. Today's vampires are no longer creatures of pure terror. They've transformed into complex, sometimes tragic anti-heroes, often portrayed as seductive and alluring figures. Yet beneath the allure, we must not forget the dark history from which these creatures emerged. The vampire myth is rooted in real fears: the fear of death, the fear of disease, and the fear of the unknown. It serves as a reminder of how ancient cultures interpreted the world around them through supernatural lenses. So what's fact and what's fiction? While there's no evidence to suggest that creatures like Count Dracula or Nosferatu ever existed, the myths themselves were born from real-world fears: plagues, disease, and death. Things that terrified our ancestors were often explained through supernatural means. People believed that the dead could return, feeding on the living, and in some cultures, the vampire became the physical embodiment of evil. Today, vampires have evolved into symbols of desire, immortality, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. But the echoes of their ancient origins still resonate, reminding us of the deep-rooted fears that once shaped their legends. The vampire myth may have changed over time, but it's undeniable that it continues to captivate us. Whether as symbols of forbidden desire or embodiments of death, these creatures remain with us, echoing the ancient fears that inspired them. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the dark history of vampires. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more ancient tales and twisted truths. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and always keep an eye on the shadows.